part 4 of 4 on the Nephilim, some salient features, interesting points. The giants or the Nephilim did not come from Seth. One of the theories proposed is that the descendants of Seth, which had hitherto been separate from the descendants of Cain, that they intermingled and that produced giants. No, the Bible never states that these Nephilim or giants came from Seth's lineage, intermarrying Cain's. Genesis 6 plainly states that these Nephilim or giants were the progeny of fallen angels or watchers who sinned by taking human women as wives. This is also written about in the apocryphal, non-canonical book of Enoch. It's not part of the 66 books, but there's a description of this in more detail there. 2 Peter chapter 2 verse 4, Peter writes, God did not hold back from punishing the angels that sinned, but by throwing them into Tartarus, Tartarus, 2 Peter 2:4. By throwing them into Tartarus, God delivered them to pits of dense darkness to be reserved for judgment. Jude 6 and 7 reads, and the angels who did not keep their proper domain, but left their own abode, he has reserved in everlasting chains under darkness for the judgment of the great day. Verse 7, as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities around them, in a similar manner to these, having given themselves over to sexual immorality and gone after strange flesh, are set forth as an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire. So it's clearly fallen angels. And in Genesis 6 we read, it's the bene elohim, or the sons of God, saw that human women were fair to look upon, so they took wives of whom they chose. In the book of Job, it's the bene elohim, the sons of God, who come before God, and Satan is among them. Job states the bene elohim sang for joy. This is obviously before they fell into sin by having liaisons with human women. So Job states the bene elohim sang for joy when the earth was being created. So bene elohim are angelic beings, not sons of Seth's lineage. Their offspring were called the Nephilim, which means, Nephilim means the fallen. The fallen. Often hybrids can be giants because there may be no gene on the female or male side to turn off the growing. For example, if you have a male tiger and a female lion that are crossed, you get a giant liger, Liger, as there is no gene to turn off the growing. Now, unless people understand how the Nephilim were corrupting the genetic makeup of humans, we will not understand the reason for the global flood or the genocide of this giant race or the races of giants. If these Nephilim races like the Anakim, Rephaim had been allowed to live, there would have been no humans left on earth. Satan knew the promise that Christ would be born of a human woman. In Eden, God said about the seed of the woman, you will bruise its heel and it will crush your head. The seed of the woman would crush the seed of the serpent. Satan knew this promise of Christ in Genesis 3:15. So he attempts to stop or block that promise, circumvent it. It appears there could even have been genetic manipulations with animals, but we won't get into that. But Noah was found perfect in his generations, meaning he wasn't sinless, holy, just, righteous, and pure. It means he was a genetically pure human with no Nephilim contamination in his DNA. Thus, God chose Noah, and he and his family were used to rebuild the human race after being saved in the ark. It is likely that the descendants of Anak, the Anakim, married descendants of Rapha. So both Anak and Rapha were Nephilim and lived and had children in the same general area. So some of those children would be both Anakim and Rephaim. Once we understand that the gene pool of the Canaanites had been corrupted or contaminated by the Nephilim, a mutant race, descendants of rebellious watchers of fallen angels, sons of God, who were evil and unable to be saved, this Anakim and Rephaim were evil and unable to be saved, then we can understand why God commanded Moses and then Joshua after him to wipe them out, including their children, Amorites, Canaanites, so many of these ites. We can see why God commanded Moses and Joshua to wipe them out. One key reason why this sin by the watchers was so grievous, commingling, having liaisons, fallen angels with human women. Why was this so grievous? Christ himself rightly stated, angels neither marry nor are given in marriage. However, these angels fell and lusted after the daughters of men and had sexual liaisons with them. This was an absolute no-no. These angels had crossed their domain and bounds and limits. Therefore, they are imprisoned in Tartarus, as Peter says, bound in chains in the abyss, as Jude says. The angels who did not keep their proper domain, he has reserved in everlasting chains in utter darkness for the judgment of the great day. And in closing, remember how Jesus was born, the Christ. The Holy Spirit hovered over Mary, and she conceived Jesus, Emmanuel, God with us. This was God's divine prerogative for the salvation of humankind and no one else's. By these watchers falling into sin, commingling and having liaisons with human women, they were an affront to the divine design and plan of God. It was one of Satan's methods of trying to block the seed of the woman. So it was God's sole divine prerogative and no one else's. It was to be a one-off, one-time event only for Emmanuel, Christ, God with us. So remember that. Satan had no business trying to imitate, duplicate, or impersonate God's divine plan and purpose. And so the flood to get rid of all those Nephilim. If you've been blessed and you haven't yet, would you subscribe to our YouTube channel, hit the notification bell, like, share, and comment below. This brings us to the end of the 4 parts on the Nephilim.